I think you've all seen something I've learned in my time at Stanford, and it's that the students here have the best things to say. And in the spirit of that, I think it's only suitable that rather than I do the introduction of our final session, which is going to have two thought leaders involved, I am going to invite Chloe Conacher, MA, MBA candidate here at Stanford University and co-president of the Ed Club here. So Chloe, please come on to the introduction.
Thank you so much, Victor. When I was applying to the GSB and GSE, I wrote in my Why Stanford essay, change will only happen with bold and creative solutions that bring the for-profit, nonprofit, technology, and scientific worlds together to collaborate, ultimately changing the way society thinks about who has access to education and how it is delivered. The two groundbreaking leaders that I have the honor of introducing today are the embodiment of what it means to collaboratively shape a future of learning that is effective, equitable, and responsive to the needs of all learners. CEO of YouTube, Neal Mohan, is a visionary leader who has played a pivotal role in shaping the world's largest video sharing platform and revolutionizing how we create, share, and consume digital content, democratizing information and education in the process. President of Stanford University, Jon Levin, is a leader who champions the value of inquiry, innovation, and the power of education to drive positive change in the world. He consistently sets the standard for academic excellence globally, while keeping educators and students at the center of every discussion. This closing session promises to be a conversation that is both enlightening and thought-provoking, offering valuable perspectives on the future of learning. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Jon Levin and Neal Mohan.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you all for joining for this this conference today. It's great to see such a terrific turnout for the people interested in ed tech and interested in what the GSE and the rest of the university are doing. And it's a pleasure to get to do this with you, Neal. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, John. Thanks to Chloe and Dean Schwartz and Isabel. Very excited to be here. I also recognize that we're between you all and drinks, so we will keep it very interesting, hopefully.
All right, we're going to do our best. So, Neal, as Chloe said, is a Stanford alum who went off and made good in the world, and he's the CEO of YouTube. And just to give you a sense of, not everyone appreciates the scale of YouTube. So YouTube has more than 1 billion watch hours every day. Okay, so there's only 8 billion people on the planet, and they're not in China. So they have about half of the rest of the world watches every month, and the people who do watch like an hour a day, including me, because this morning I spent an hour watching people kayaking on the Indus River, and so it wasn't that educational. But one thing people don't know about YouTube, apart from the scale necessarily, is how much you've gotten involved in education in recent years. So maybe tell us a little bit about YouTube's role these days in education.
Yeah, so I'll start by maybe giving a little bit of that evolution, because it's really changed over time. And YouTube, as you mentioned, John, has billions of hours of watch time. There's a couple billion people that come to the platform every single day. I'm sure everybody here has their own stories on our platform. And when YouTube started, which is coming up on almost 20 years now, it was really a place for entertainment. Your music, your favorite creators, what have you, and it's kind of grown from there. And I've been there kind of nearly a decade, and that's really sort of what it was like kind of about 10 years ago. Although we had lots of people trying to make learning use cases happen on the platform. Khan Academy started on YouTube 18 years ago, was a pioneer in that respect. But the big accelerator really, at least in my view, was the pandemic, was COVID. There were, before COVID, so like January 2020, there were, a few hundred videos that were sort of labeled kind of online learning or what have you. Obviously, there were more than that in our corpus. But just a couple months later, just in March of 2020, there were thousands of those being uploaded. And so that was a big accelerant in terms of people really realizing, really through being forced to do so, that YouTube would be a place where you could really educate and engage young people. And now, fast forward to today, you see creators really kind of across the spectrum producing content for education, everything from Miss Rachel for preschool kids. I'm sure people here are familiar with it, especially those of you with very young kids. Art for kids for elementary school kids, and then all the way through higher ed. MIT OpenCourseWare, I know the School of Engineering has a channel. Dean Schwartz has got a podcast on the platform. So there's lots and lots of education use cases emerging every single day, kind of on that evolution. And that's where we are today, thousands and thousands of education, we call them edutubers, producing content that engages everybody from the youngest kids through lifelong learning.
Yes, the opportunity for, if you're at Stanford, for example, nowadays as a faculty member, and you want to put something out that's going to potentially reach a lot of people. I'll just give you an example. Stanford has about 2 million subscribers on YouTube. So if you get something on the Stanford channel, you're going to have potentially millions of people. I was at the business school until last year. The business school had 3 million subscribers. And there are faculty who have put up talks that have 1 million, in one case 48, one of our communications faculty had a video that had 48 million views. And I'll tell you that when you become a faculty member at a place like Stanford, the idea that you're going to say anything that is going to be heard by 48 million people, that is not sort of in your set of things that you're expecting, even 1 million people. I mean, you're hoping the kids in the class are going to not fall asleep by the end of the lecture. And so that scale is really extraordinary, and that's opened up an incredible set of avenues for people teaching at places like Stanford, let alone anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, no, that's true, and actually that sort of brings to mind that those examples that you gave, John, which is the way that I think about YouTube is that a lot of that learning kind of that happens on our platform until recently sort of was happening, frankly, despite us really doing that much on the platform. And the analogy that I use is, YouTube is like a really, really big library, right? Billions and billions of videos, everything from, how do I fix my garage door to, high-level physics, right? Everything between. Except it's like a library where all the books are kind of strewn on the floor. And so one of the big challenges that we sort of tried to wrestle with was, how do you actually organize that in a way that is pedagogically much more efficient and effective? And so we came up with this concept called courses. And the idea there is that if you are the edutuber, Stanford professor, what have you, you can upload your content and organize it in a way that is by your design, the way that you want your students to actually consume that content. And you can append the videos with other sort of instructional aids that allow it to actually be a full-fledged course. Now, the one thing, of course, that YouTube doesn't do is, doesn't provide any of that sort of interaction, right? Like, doesn't provide the actual connection with the professors or the teachers, the classroom teachers, doesn't provide the certification, but it can really be a tool through this courses mechanism to augment what's happening in the classroom.
Yeah, so your experience in building out the YouTube platform for education, I think in many ways parallels some of the higher ed experience, which was that the early attempts to go online from universities were all about how do you create basically the analog of books. How do you take lectures and put them up online? You're creating the content, and even something like the MOOCs and so forth were basically like just putting the content up there. And one of the lessons in higher education in the last 10 years, as many people in this room know, has been that yes, that's still valuable. It's incredibly valuable to be able to look up some topic and then go get an expert lecture on that. I mean, you want to learn about transformer models in AI, you could go watch Andre Karpathy's videos on YouTube. It's a great introduction. He was a Stanford alum. Hard-pressed to find anything better. However, a lot of education is about the whole experience that goes around the content. It's about the peers, it's about the learning, it's about the interaction. And all of the successful higher education online programs have basically built that in. They have models for teaching and structure and assignments and peers and so forth. And it sounds like you all are on a path to provide more of that as well.
Yeah, just a couple of quick examples on that front. I'm curious to get your thoughts on how you think about this in the Stanford context too. Is on the higher education side, one example that sort of gets at what you're talking about is this collaboration that we have with Arizona State, with Michael Crow. It's called Study Hall. I think some of you might be familiar with it. And it combines a couple of things that you just highlighted there in terms of your insights, which is what if you could really open up access to the faculty that exists at ASU to lots, like 10x or 100x more students, but do it in a way that was really accessible. And so what Study Hall does is actually takes the kind of the educational material that might come from a faculty member, a math faculty member at the university, but combines it with YouTube creators. In this case, Hank and John Green, some of our original edutubers on YouTube, they have a channel called Crash Course, and puts those two things together. So the videos are much more engaging, but they have the high quality of being taught by a university professor in conjunction with this Crash Course style. They're free, so there's 16 million people that have subscribed to the channel, but the things that they don't do are assessment, credentialing, and sort of certification, and that's where the university comes in. And so Study Hall is really a combination of kind of the distribution and sort of the reach and engagement of YouTube, but combined with real credit, like university credit that you can earn through ASU, which is now been accepted by 150 different universities, millions of views on this content, thousands of students that have gone through. So it's really kind of like a real-world example of what you're describing, which is there's certain things that we can do and certain things that we'll never be able to do that actually the learning institution needs to be able to bring in.
Although that's sort of a sad role for universities. If our role is, I mean, just to pick up on what you said, if our role is assessment and credentialing,
well,
that
also
that's
the material though, right? Like, because the university faculty are the ones who actually create the pedagogy, like what actually is going to be taught in the class. They do it in conjunction with YouTubers, but the material is actually all driven by the university.
They could be creators too.
It can be creators too, yes.
But don't you think that I just want to push on that a little more because I think it actually raises an interesting question about what are the one thing that's so interesting about having a platform like YouTube, which is basically a way to deconstruct education into the individual lessons and contents, is it sort of forces you to think about what are the essential components of education, say at higher education, what are the essential components? And obviously part of it is the lectures and the content, part of it is the selection of students into the universities, part of it is the accreditation, but then another part of it is sort of the experience of being with everyone else. Mm-hmm. And is YouTube ever gonna get that part in? Is that in the future that we're gonna somehow virtualize that?
I mean, my view is I don't think so. I think there's limits to, and actually this study hall model that I'm describing is one part of the big picture. And I think the idea there is it reaching a set of potential students that otherwise wouldn't have had access to that type of an environment. So it's really broadening that accessibility in a way that is a different experience from actually being on the campus for sure. But it's a way to kind of raise human capital for a set of people that otherwise wouldn't have. But the flip side example is like YouTube inside the classroom. So when you look at like K through 12, one of the things that we hear from teachers of K through 12 students is like, can you actually give me that content from YouTube, but put it in the context that I can use in the classroom, like stripping away the ads or making it so that, when you watch that learning video, the next video that's recommended to you isn't, Taylor Swift, right? Like, is something that the classroom teacher can contain. So we have this capability called Player for Education, which is YouTube embedded into whatever environment the classroom teacher wants, but it's really a teaching aid in that case. And so it's kind of like the flip of a study hall type example.
I think we do have a class here this year on Taylor Swift, but I didn't get into it.
I'm sure it would be, I was going to say, it's probably oversubscribed. But I'm curious how you think, like, do you think that this, I do think there's a limitation, for example, to what a platform like YouTube can do here, and we have a specific role, but by no means are we the full picture.
We've talked about it many times in the past. At a place like Stanford, I tend to think of educational technology as being much more of a complement to what we do than a substitute, in the sense that there are many examples at Stanford where faculty are using technology in parts of their courses on the campus. So they've flipped their classes, for example, or they've used technology to develop the assignments, or even to do the grading in some cases in an automated way. So that it's substitutes for their own work and effort in that sense. But by far, I think most of the exciting things that have happened have had less effect directly on the classroom experience. The modal experience of a student who comes to a place like Stanford is still, you sit in a classroom. Our biggest innovation in some ways at Stanford in our curriculum in the last couple of years has been our required freshman class. It's taught in discussion groups of 18 students with a faculty member. There is no, and that's still a great model of education, actually, just to sit around a table and talk. And the opportunities for the university are largely in the space of what you're talking about, which is to find ways for either individual faculty, because they have great things to say, or the schools or the university to create programs that just have much, much broader reach, just vastly broader reach, orders of magnitude bigger. And I think the opportunities for that are just getting big, are just continuing to increase. And in the same way, when I think about who your audience for education is, it's super important audience, I'm sure, in the US, but you get out around the world and there are no substitutes to the type of education you could get on YouTube. How could you could be in a rural village in India now and you can hear the same lecture at Stanford that our computer science students are hearing. And we just take that for granted now, that's the way the world is, but 20 years ago, that would have been inconceivable that was happening, and we shouldn't, miss how transformative a change that is globally, and that's such a great opportunity for a place like Stanford to create education that really spreads much more broadly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think, as I'm sure was talked about here all day, I do think AI is going to further accelerate that.
All right, so tell me what you're doing in AI.
We're doing lots of different things, lots of things sort of outside of the learning space, as you and I have talked about here. But I think a couple things that I think are super, super interesting, kind of to build on what you just talked about around having, your content be accessible in so many different ways. That's an area where I think AI can have a really profound impact in terms of the learning use case on YouTube. So for example, we just rolled out this capability. If you have an Android phone, you might be able to see this on videos. If you have iOS, it's coming soon. But the idea is that if you watch a video, like a math video, you're a high school kid, you can, right below the video, you can tap on a button that says ask. And you can ask YouTube about the video. And it won't spit out the answer. It will do it in a way that's sort of like a kind of a Socratic method, sort of teasing out the core concepts of the video so that the student can actually learn deeply about what they're watching, whether it's math or biology or what have you. And that is all generative. It's all basically based on a large language model that we've built. We've trained it in a way that doesn't just spit out the answer or pull the answer from other parts of the web. It takes the student along. And that's a very, very rudimentary early use case of this capability. But you can imagine how it could sort of profoundly impact that learning experience. Another one is this experiment that we're doing with computer science professor at NYU, Dan Schiffman. And he's created this thing called the SchiffBot, which is basically you're learning, he's alongside you as you're learning how to code through his videos, through real examples. And so those are some of the kind of, I think, sort of neat use cases you'll see. But I think one of them is going to actually be potentially even broader in its impact in the near term at least, which is AI through these generative models can eliminate sort of what is one of the biggest barriers to access to the amazing educational content that's being produced at a place like Stanford, which is language. So just basically being able to have multiple tracks of audio associated with the videos on YouTube, but to be able to do it in a way that covers, the head languages, but also the long tail of languages where the lips are matched up, and to be able to do that in an automated fashion, I think is really literally just kind of months, couple years kind of away. And so that's going to, I think, be revolutionary too.
And dubbed in as opposed to just in written.
Literally the intonation, the voice, kind of the inflection, all of that should be something that AI should be able to handle, including, like I said, making the lips match, et cetera. And so I'm really, really bullish on the impact that will have on education.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing, because even just a few years ago, we taught global programs at Stanford where we had simultaneous translation.
Yeah.
So even though there's no classroom noise, you just had the faculty member teaching and you had simultaneous translation. It's incredible that has changed in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, I'm curious though on the AI piece, how do you think about incorporating that in terms of actually equipping your students in the future world where this is going to impact everything that they have, that they're going to face in their careers, regardless of field?
Well, that's such an interesting question. I mean, I'll tell you a story that we had at the beginning of this year in August. I started in this role as president on 1st of August, and one of the first things we did a leadership retreat for all the academic leadership at the university, and we were going around and asked all the deans to present what's going on at your school, and of course all of them talked about AI in some form or machine learning data, and it was different across the schools. So in the humanities and sciences, it was, well, there's changes in the way we're going to do research in astrophysics, and there's changes in the way we're going to do biology, and in medicine, it's drug discovery, and biomedical data sciences, and healthcare, and in the business school, it's business processes, and statistics, and climate modeling in the sustainability school, and AI and law, and so forth. There's all these different things, a lot of data-driven discovery. And the person that everybody wanted to hear from, far and away more than anyone else, was Dan Schwartz, the dean of the Ed School. And everybody wanted Dan to answer the question, what is going to happen with education? And he didn't actually have the answer to it, which was, but he's working on it, and that's part of what this conference and the accelerator at the Ed School is all about, and that's kind of what makes it exciting, actually, because it's so clear that if you just look at, what do we teach in higher education? Fundamentally, so much of higher education, a lot of it is about how do you assimilate large amounts of information and then synthesize it and verbalize it. And even these very early generation models are pretty good at that. I mean, not A+ good, but they're B+ good. And so you can tell that's going to have, how could it not have a big effect? Mm-hmm. Now, one thing I will say is that I think at least at Stanford, the way we will approach this is to allow a lot of experimentation, just sort of typical Stanford entrepreneurial approach. We'll allow faculty to try out a lot of different things. And I think there will be subjects that change quickly and in very significant ways, the way we teach computer science coding and so forth, because you can use a Copilot type of approach. And to some extent, maybe writing and so forth will change. But the basic model of what happens at a university like Stanford I think will not change for a while, because so much of the overall model at a place like Stanford is you're fundamentally getting exposed to this very broad array of ideas across disciplines, and you're learning how to kind of bring all kinds of different knowledge to bear and to work with other people in doing that. And the AI, I don't think will get to a level of excellence in that for quite some time. And so there'll still be a whole set of skills. I mean, no matter how automated we get in some of the teaching and some of the things you can do with AI, the basic model of the university that I mentioned before, where you learn how to sit around a room and really sort things out with a bunch of people, which is such an important skill in life, that will still be an important part of the university. And that part, I think, will take a long time to change. So we'll see, some of the things that have always mattered will continue to matter, and then there'll be all kinds of opportunity for experimentation. And that's going to be a great next decade in education, I think. We are at time, and that means it is your opportunity to have a drink with each other. So with that, let me thank Neal Mohan for joining us.